Thank you for attending the fourth of 4 RACP workshop here. I don't believe the Senator's office is on, but when they join, they may want to say a word. But in the meantime, we have Joe Malinowski from Becker and Frondorf. Joe and I have worked on many projects. Joe's role as a project manager. He can explain it more. But I'll let Joe take it away. And like we've been working in the other sessions, please enter your questions in the chat and we will stop and answer them the best we can. And let's have a great session. Thanks, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. Malinowski here with Becker and Frondorf. We are a project manager. We also, the other side of our business, we do cost estimating, but I think today I'm here as on the project management side to talk about the RACP and how our involvement and the involvement of third-party project managers through the administration of the grant during the construction phase, and during the construction phase to the reimbursement of the RACP fund. Quinn, if you could go to the next slide, please.
Sure. And Joe, your audio is coming in scratchy for me. Maybe if you could turn your video on and off and see if that clears it up.
Sure. Yeah. Testing, is that better?
It's still a little wonky.
Apologies. Is that any better, Quinn?
It sounds better. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Any problems with the audio, I do apologize. And I can always log out and log back in. So we, as a project firm here, are very familiar with the RACP program through the Commonwealth. As Peter said, I have worked together on numerous projects through the last several years. As a firm, we've probably been involved with several dozen projects that have funding in some way or another. So we're very familiar with the program, with the evolution of the requirements, and we always try to add one sort of role in our project management scope is the oversight and administration of our clients' RACP requirements. And there's a lot that happens during the course of a construction project for institution or organization that can be and new and sort of scary. And if the requirements of the Commonwealth and the RACP program on top, at times a little intimidating. So our role today is to talk about how to help sort of ease some of those concerns, talk at a high level about how the process works, and sort of going from there. So clients navigate the RACP funding. I think keys to success, as you can see on the screen, the structuring of contracts. What we encourage is clients and their architects during the design phase construction. If we know that there's RACP funding associated with the program, or there's a pursuit of RACP funding that may not yet or awarded, we encourage the architects and design teams to write into their specifications what the requirements will be as the solicitations go to the contracting community. It's a lot easier for builders, general contractors to know what the requirements are up front, and it can make things easier during the process. The payment applications. So the RACP funding, as many of you probably know, is a reimbursable program. You will typically pay the contractor for services and goods performed, or and then seek reimbursement for that. We can talk a little bit later about the mechanism for what the contractors owe you in terms of their application requisitions for payment, and their documentation is compliant in order for you to ensure that you're going to be reimbursed by the state. Compliance throughout the program, there's requirement of holds, the law are certified payrolls. We're going to talk about these certified payrolls, domestic steel procurement, and competitive bidding process, and we're going to talk about each of those in details, and we have some a lot of light into those. For any project that has, we think documentation, record keeping early on through the life of the project and even after the project, just prove to getting that reimbursement. Next slide, please. So for those folks who are familiar with RACP awards, once award is announced, an organization within the first 6 months of the award business plan to the office budget, typically we will work with the client and Peter and PIDC to put together that application in the business. After the Office of the Budget, the preliminary grant agreement is released, and the grant agreement is typically funneled through PIDC, and then there will be a sub-grant agreement to an owner for a particular project. For construction compliance, this is what I where I think we really want to focus on is the structure of those. If it's known that there will be RACP funding, getting the language included into those agreements and contracts is, really sort of key. I've been involved in several projects where retroactively an owner or client has gone back to try to recapture necessary documentation for reimbursement, and it makes it so much more difficult. And if contractually you can tie a contractor or a vendor's responsibilities to ensuring compliance with the program, it does make it so much smoother. The review of the and grant compliance. So with each grant agreement will typically come a list of conditions, some of which items that will happen during the course of normal construction procurement administration, but they are noted by the Commonwealth or the Office of Budget as being special conditions. They live as the agreement or the sub-grant agreement, and a little bit about how those special conditions are met. And the first payment, bit about that today, how and when in the cycle of construction does one go about seeking that reimbursement, and also as a project moves on, if there's a regular draw request to the Commonwealth, how and when does that tie into the final execution of the grant. As far as reimbursement, facilitation meeting, typically with Peter and whoever the retains for oversight, satisfaction of those special conditions. The first payment request and the final audit happens at the end of the project. Next slide, Quinn. And I'm just checking. Is the audio okay? Is my audio okay?
It's better, but it's still breaking out every now and then.
Apologize for that. So this slide represents the hard for folks to intent was not not for literal translation, but this was actually taken from the from RACP website, posted at one time. It's no longer, I believe it's no longer posted on the website. It shows all of and the involvement of the state and the office of the budget, of the candidate, the owner, the grantee, but Peter and PIDC's role are, and sort of walks through this entire process. And I think award process and getting through construction. So typically engage with clients are at any point during the design or construction phase. We can think when we do in design phase and in pre-construction, we can help sort of right size project budgets, project schedules, help clients set things straight. And with RACP funding, of course, we can also sort of cues that everyone's going to need to be compliant with. So again, this is not entirely go through each of these steps, but more to sort of highlight there is a process which one needs to go through, and we're going to talk a little bit as we go on what those steps are. So for those who have received or familiar with the RACP program, you know that tabs associated with RACP grant we've created. This is an internal sort of document that we use. It really just sort of assigns responsibility to each of the parties. As I said, it can be somewhat intimidating when everything is sort of thrown at an organization at once. And I think we really strive to have an understanding of what an organization needs. What's Peter's role and PIDC's role in helping to facilitate some of the upfront documentation? How do organizations internally need to strategize about compliance around their business plan and the community sort of act? And as a third-party project manager, we typically reserve everything associated with a party, anything the contractor is going to need to provide in terms of documentation, anything that the architect or designer needs to furnish. That's where we typically sort of engage. You can go to the next slide, please. And this is of a certified payroll. So as I mentioned at the top, the three most prominent requirements from the Office of the Budget are the procurement of domestic steel, these certified payrolls to ensure typically projects in the city meet the prevailing wage requirements, because if it's a union project, typically the union wages of what the prevailing wages require. But there is a whole series of documentation for the entire workforce associated on any project. Each trade responsible for the weekly or typically monthly submission of these certified payrolls, and it identifies the worker, their wage rates, and it's just to ensure that the Commonwealth dollars are going to fair and equitable reimbursement for the work. When it comes to the reimbursement portion of the grant, when a client or an owner is engaged in a construction contract, typically you're going to see reimbursement for the funds that you're going to spend. That those won't be satisfied, realized until several months later. The mechanism, and since a client has to go out of pocket to pay a general contractor, we typically tie any of this kind of documentation to a contractor's requisition for payment. So if a contractor at the end of the month submits a payment application, if you will, dollars, before we recommend to our client that they pay that amount either in part or in full, we want to be sure that each of the trades that worked on that project in any given month have submitted their certified payrolls. As you see on any steel that was procured in the project, we want to be sure that we have that material sourced, that we know that it's been domestically sort of sorted and stamped in the USA. And if not, if the general contractor or the construction manager has not provided those, and again, this is sort of set up front early in, if it's written in the contract, we're big proponents of clear communication up front. If the contractor, the general contractor, or the construction manager understands up front that the required, they can buy in the subcontracting community or with their trade partners, they can buy and ensure that these services are going to be provided. And as long as people know that money may not be there at the end of the month or the end of the week, unless there's documentation sort of clear and delivered to the owner, it is a system of checks and balances. And people want to be paid. People are hungry, and what the requisite requires early on, they typically understand that. I think that was the last slide we had. I do want to talk about construction procurement, and there's not a slide to go with that. There's really two ways we talked. I mentioned competitive bidding or competitive solicitation requirements. There's generally, with some nuance, there's two strategies for how the Commonwealth wants to see construction services procured. Competitively bid, 3 general contractor, term general contractor, construction manager, builder, contractor are used interchangeably by different folks with different understanding, but they do mean different things. Solicitation to a minimum of 3 general contractors is one in which an owner or client enter into an agreement with a single contractor who may perform some work on the project themselves. They may have some of their own workforce, typically for general labor or carpentry, for which those costs could be reimbursed as long as it's competitive bid. There's also a construction manager agreement arrangement where an owner may enter into an agreement with a construction manager, at which point each of their trade bids, every work with the construction manager not self-performing any work, any trades procured or services procured for the job would need to be 3 bids solicited through an open book process, and all of that documentation at either the construction manager level, any solicitation subcontractor level is an important requirement. It's in the Office of the Budget looked at very carefully. There's no right sort of approach or strategy. Every project is different, unique in terms of its scope, in terms of its timing, in terms of the development of design documentation. We're drawing sort of where other funding sources may sort of be. So we work really closely with our clients to ensure that they understand the pros, cons, benefits for each of the approaches, and make sure most important thing, if there's nothing else that taken out of today's sort of presentation, is that anyone who's pursuing a RACP grant needs to ensure that the solicitation of construction is through any approach, construction manager, general contractor, you really want to have clear documentation of that entire process, from bid solicitation through bidders who decline to bid. You just want to make sure that there's an email, there's a paper trail. Really just wants to see, gone are the days of, sort of picking the phone and calling somebody, seeing how busy they are, and if they're interested in a project, right? Everything's communicated electronically right now. So the Office of the Budget is to ensure that those requirements are really sort of met, and they're very hard to reproduce after the fact. There might be impossible to reproduce after the fact. And we have strategies. We help our clients document those projects. Records. We ensure that the general contractors, if they're bidding to the subcontractor community, that everything is sort of clearly outlined. The process or method through which those solicitations are offered are clear and compliant with the Office of the Budget, and we just keep very good documents of those solicitations. So I think, Peter, that's my sort of general overview. The slides that I don't know if excited.
No, that was great. Yeah, I think I'm going to answer a couple questions from the chat and just reiterate a couple points you made. And thank you so much for presenting and explaining this to everybody. The first question in the chat from an anonymous attendee. Please talk about how the issues of unexpected increased costs might require a change in scope and how that is processed through the system, whether it shows up as a shortfall in match versus what is required to access the full grant amount. This is a great question for RACP. There's a few ways to go about this. When there's unexpected cost increases, so the RACP documentation is really a living document until your final pay application is paid, your contractor's final payment is made. So you're going to apply for a RACP program, a project during the e-application period, and that might be this year, but your project might not have a shovel in the ground for 3 years from now. So your scope of your project, the cost of your project is going to evolve. Some get more expensive, some get less expensive. It's up to the individual project how that happens. So what you need to do is the scope of your project from your e-application to award to submission of the business plan application document we talked about, so the post-award documentation, it can evolve. You're not held to build the vanilla box for $1 million. It can turn into a 2-story box for $1.5 million. What is required is the matching funds to cover that cost. So there's never any leeway with having, say, my project grew in scope and cost, but I don't have enough matching funds to cover it, then that doesn't work for RACP. No matter how your project evolves, you're still going to need the matching funds to cover the increased project costs. And the second part of that is during construction, there's change orders, there's change in price from your initial contract through your final payment to your contractor. The rule in RACP is you cannot increase the scope of the project more than 20% while you're in construction. So when there's an executed contract saying your box is going to cost $1 million, you cannot add scope more than 20% because they feel like that's getting around the bidding requirements. Things they look favorably upon if your project does have more than 20% in change orders is unforeseen conditions. When you get into the ground and things, are unexpected, or you get behind a wall and things are unexpected. That happens during construction, and the Office of the Budget does understand that. Again, it's handled on a very case-by-case basis. So to answer the question, first question, your project can evolve. The price from what you set out originally to how it ends up does change, but you do need those additional match funds. Sonia asks, I have a question about the timing of reimbursements. It sounds to me from your description that I can pay our contractors in a timely fashion. I have been thinking there may be a significant time delay in reimbursement, months or even years. Can you clarify? Yes. So Sonia, from when you first apply to RACP in your e-application, when you get awarded, to when you get a grant agreement, to when you're eligible for reimbursement, can be many, many years. So the requirement of RACP is to pay your contractors in a timely manner, and to have the match funding and to have the RACP bridge funding in place for you to be able to finish your project. But then the lag time between those payments and a reimbursement can be some time. And I just want to pause. We do have the Senator's office here. I didn't know if Aisha wanted to jump in and say a few words while she joined us.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry for being late. Wanted to just commend PIDC and the staff for putting this together, and for all the partners to say thank you, and also to the participants for joining the conversation. It's a really great participation that we've been having, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate the sponsorship of this event as well. I'm going to jump back into questions. Can we get a loan from PIDC for the construction costs? Then we pay them and wait for the RACP program to pay back PIDC, or do we have to get a commercial loan? If you're at our last session, Sarah Stroney from our real estate finance department really explained how there's the requirement for match funding, which can be a loan from a bank, different grants, cash in the bank, a lot of different sources, and as well as the requirement to bridge your RACP grant amount. PIDC does have a RACP bridge grant product. We can, obviously talk to each individual project about that, but most local banks also have a product to bridge RACP grants. It just depends what is best for your organization, but happy to chat about that. And while we have a break in questions, I just want to go back and talk about some of Joe's, there are some more questions, excuse me. Savannah asks, can you explain the process for U.S. Steel certifications and difficulties people may run into getting these? Are the contractors responsible for those certs? Thank you, Savannah, for another great question. The RACP steel requirements are basically a Buy American steel requirement. The contractors or your subcontractors who supply the steel products are ultimately responsible for those certificates. There's not a level of difficulty to getting them, but it is something where your project team needs to be aware this is a RACP project, and you need to obtain these steel documentation during construction. There's a very long list of items that are no longer made in the United States that are exempt from the steel requirements. Things like air conditioning units, air handling units, elevators, items like that. And it does not get as granular as nuts and bolts. You don't need a steel cert for your metal nail. It's really the larger ticket items, the structural steel, the rebar, the electrical conduit, interior framing, things like that. There's also an aluminum requirement, which is a little more of a gray area, but that aluminum requirement, again, is all on the RACP website to really dig into, but it involves windows mostly, where windows have aluminum construction. And that's just, there's a few countries that are barred from providing that aluminum. Again, the RACP website is the best place to find out about all the steel documentation, and I can answer those questions individually.
And Peter, can I just add one point?
Yeah, please.
As the RACP program, kind of expand more, owners and clients are familiar, so is the contracting community. So are the general contractors, so are the subcontractors. I've become versed, and it's steel suppliers, as Peter noted. It could be mechanical subcontractors, electrical subcontractors, carpentry. There's clarity of the local subcontract community in terms of what is required. They may not all the specific details, and it's important for each project to have those articulated early on, but contracting community is much more than it was even 5 or 10 years ago in terms of what is required. They know where to find the information in terms of compliance. So it does sort of, the onus ultimately, of course, is on the owner and their project management team to ensure that the contractors are compliant. But I think the contractor is much more suited for the requirements and more versed now than they were just a few years ago.
Thank you, Joe. Savannah had another question. Is it a requirement to submit your first pay application before receiving an executed grant agreement? There's no requirement to do so. Typically, you're going to be in active construction during the period where you're eligible to get a grant agreement, just with how the RACP program works, kind of the speed of the program, but there's certainly no requirement to provide that documentation. Someone asked, Joe mentioned they assist with the process of documentation organization. Does this assistance cost money from the candidate, or is it provided as part of a donated service partner with PIDC? That's a great question. So that's one of the points I wanted to emphasize that Joe was making. RACP is an exercise in housekeeping, in documentation, retention, and organization. You're going to do a construction project, and you're going to be asked for literally thousands of pieces of documentation. And to be able to have that organized and ready to provide when asked will be the ultimate decider of how quickly you navigate through the RACP process. When someone asks for documentation, the ability for you to provide it is key. So what PIDC does as part of our service is we do set up everybody with a ShareFile account. That's an FTP document retention account where all of your RACP documentation lives. So I help you manage that site. I put up folders, I organize it for you. And it's really, that's a great resource. But at the end of the day, it's your ability or that person in your organization who can manage the documentation flow is really going to help your RACP experience.
Peter, I don't recall. Did you answer Sonja's question yet in the Q&A?
Yes, about reimbursement. I did. Okay. And then the other kind of points I want to talk about to reiterate what Joe said was the bidding and the payrolls. Bidding is a crucial part of the RACP process. Please reach out to me or to your project manager about RACP bidding compliance. This also it's a very easy requirement. The requirement is that you solicit a minimum of 3 bids, either at the general contractor level or a minimum solicitation of 3 bids from each of your subcontractors. The documentation for soliciting subcontractor bids is exponentially greater than soliciting 3 bids from a general contractor or construction manager. Projects go about it different ways because it depends what's best for your project, and there's no right or wrong answer. But again, providing that documentation is critical, and it's simply PDFing an email as your bid package goes out. But if you're not actively thinking that this project may receive RACP funds, it's not something you would automatically do. So that's a great example of where housekeeping document retention is, it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be very active consideration in your construction process.
Thank you. We also have a couple of questions that came in from somebody on an iPhone.
Okay.
Why it's not showing up in the Q&A box. They asked 2 questions. The first one was, can we get a loan from PIDC for the construction costs, then wait for the RACP program to pay PIDC back? Or do we have to go get a commercial loan?
Yeah, so I think I answered that question already. Okay. And yeah, so please watch the 3rd session of the seminar. That would really help you with those questions. And Deborah asked, is project management costs included in the application? Is there a rule of thumb to estimate that cost? I'll let Joe answer that. It's not an included cost, but it can be a match cost. So again, you need your $2 million project, you need $1 of RACP and $1 of match to equal your $2 million project. We've talked about throughout this series the different examples of match, and project management is an example of match. I don't want to put Joe on the spot too much about cost, but I think he can give you some ballparks of what to expect.
Yeah, sure. And before I answer, I just want to tack one comment onto the previous question, Peter. If we're involved in any organization that's either pursuing a RACP grant, or certainly once you're awarded a RACP grant, a cash outflow projection is essential. It's absolutely to understanding. There's no, as Peter said, there's no, accurate date to project when that first reimbursement is going to come. I'd expect that it's going to be months, not days or weeks. And I think any organization needs to understand their cash position relative to the timing around their project, timing of when construction needs to start, any ending requirements, and a good cash outflow can help an organization figure out their interim financing needs and requirements. As for project management and those costs or expenses, I to articulate what that might be. We as typically as full service project managers, grant grants is a portion of what we entwined with overall design, kind of oversight, cost right sizing, scope and budget right sizing, schedule management, assembly of project teams. The RACP compliance portion is just a fraction of the overall service. I believe there are those out there who may offer RACP grant administration. I don't know that for a fact. I think there are. Again, as a project manager, we like to be involved all the way through, and when the RACP grant and the strategies around that are sort of woven into a project, in terms of that cash outflow, in terms of how construction is procured, administration of the costs for those services, for that documentation, for that record keeping, really do become sort of minimal, compared amount of what a typical RACP grant may be. So I can say for Becker and Fondorf, I think you add whatever our payment is on any project, certainly a RACP project, our scope are paid for in the amount of time, money, energy, and headache that we serve our clients during the course of the project. I can say that.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Michelle had a question. With regard to land match, which value should be used, the land value alone or the total to include improvement value? So what the Office of the Budget looks for is an as-is sales comparison approach appraisal to your land and building. The future value is not included in that. What they don't want is you to sort of double dip there, to use their money to get a future value, to then use that as match against your grant. So they require the as-is value, not the improvement value. All right, no open questions, and I'll just touch upon the prevailing wage sort of as the last topic for today. Joe talked about it, but prevailing wage was a highly sensitive, highly examined part of the RACP project. You are required to pay Pennsylvania prevailing wage on all RACP projects. You register for this wage rate at the Department of Labor and Industry of Pennsylvania. They will provide you the whole list of wage rates to provide to your contractor. The wage rates are similar and mostly the same to Philadelphia Union wage scale, but that does not mean a union project is automatically compliant with RACP. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around that topic. RACP goes by the Pennsylvania prevailing wage, not by the Philadelphia union rates. They may be the same or very similar, but they're not the same thing. So when discussing the project costs, when discussing who's eligible to work on your project, please know that there's no union requirements. There's Pennsylvania prevailing wage requirements, and the documentation of those wages being paid is an onerous process. For every worker, you need their exact classification. So labor 1, the rate that they were paid, the rate that their benefits were paid for every day they were on site. When you talk about the size of a construction project, that's a lot of people and a lot of wages. The Office of the Budget hires compliance consultants to check compliance for prevailing wage. They'll catch you on an underpayment of 1 penny and they'll make you fix it. Every project has minor payroll issues like that. That's typical. But what we do not want to see is, large underpayments, reoccurring underpayments, because that will slow or you will not get reimbursed until those issues are fixed. So I just want to be very clear and direct that this is a prevailing wage program and you're expected to adhere to those wage rates.
Great point, Peter. If I can just put a fine point on that, project is required to register with, I believe it's Department of Labor and Industry, where they will generate the prevailing for your project in the county the project in. And what we typically do is on our client's behalf, once we know that, I forget what exactly the timing is, I can happen in.
It's 90 days before construction.
90 before construction. Okay, so before construction starts, where the Department of Labor and Industries website. The project gets registered, and those prevailing wage rates generated by the Commonwealth are to the general contractor, and their response, again, the mechanism as a reimbursable program mechanism is that they're the first line of defense to ensure that the subs and the trade partners for the project are adhering to those. As Peter said, somebody at the Office of the Budget is going to look at those things down to the penny. Neither we nor the general contractor make it every single, but if there's a system all the way through the office and the administrators at a subcontractor's office are looking at them, preparing them thoughtfully and in compliance with how the project has, the construction manager or general contractors reviewing them. We're looking at them all before they get to the Office of the Budget. It greatly mitigates the risk of problems. So it does need to be registered. And again, and if there are noticeable flaws, errors, deficiencies in a particular, within a particular trade or a particular subcontractor, we typically work with the general contractor to either quickly rectify that and get it in so that they can, everybody again wants to be sort of paid. And if there's a lack of response, or it's not fair to tie up payment to all of the partners on a project if there's one who's not being compliant. So we'll make recommendations and strategize with the clients on how to pay those who are compliant and withhold payment from those who are not.
Thank you, Joe. If we don't have any more questions, I'll let the Senator's office make a closing remark, and then I'll kind of wrap it up from there.
Actually, there is one more question from an attendee. What is the process if a project must be downsized because of an increased costs?
Sure, I will happily answer that. So that happens. If you don't have the matching funds to see through, what the initial plan was, that happens. There's a few options. One is to you've been awarded your grant and you can just hold on to it. Right? You hold on to that award letter until you have, raised enough funds to complete the project. If the project must go on and you don't have the funds, if you only have a smaller project than your grant can support, then you can use a piece of grant. You're not obligated to use 100% of your grant, your award amount on one project. You can phase the RACP grant into a few distinct projects. The big caveat there is the first phase must be $1 million. So that's $500,000 of RACP, $500,000 of match in your first phase. There's some leeway there with the ratio of that match versus reimbursable cost, but obviously you can have, there's some leeway and there's some wiggle room, and I'll work with each individual project. But yes, projects get downsized all the time. You're not obligated to spend your full award amount at once. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you again to the sponsors, to the African American Chamber of Commerce, Asian American Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Independence Business Alliance, PACDC, and most importantly, the PIDC for putting this workshop on, these series of workshops on. I think the biggest takeaway is you don't know what you don't know. So make sure that you keep yourself informed about the RACP guidelines. Somebody asked for the link to the RACP website page at the Office of the Budget, and I did go ahead and put it into the chat. Go look onto the Office of the Budget's website and familiarize yourself with the guidelines. Make sure that you keep your documentation in a a solid, organized manner, because like Peter said, if you've done 3 bids and you can't find the emails that you sent, or you can't find the phone calls that you made, you have to make sure that you keep a log of the work that you're doing on your project so that you can prove what you've done. This is a great program, but it is a hard to access program. So just be aware that PIDC is there to help. They're the stewards, the guidelines. They are the grantee for RACP funds. An organization that receives grantee funds from PIDC is a sub-grantee. You just have to remember that PIDC is the go-to entity for you to be able to successfully complete your projects. They are there to help. Your elected officials are there to help. Continue to build their relationships with your elected officials to make sure that your project is being stewarded in a way that's going to make sure that you can complete your project, whether you have to phase it or whether you can complete it fully. And we appreciate, again, PIDC's willingness to do these 4 workshops. It is a dense program, a lot of information, but it is something that you can do this. But again, familiarize yourself with the guidelines so that you are educating yourself and you go in with the information so that your project can be completed in a timely manner, because time is money. And as we see, construction costs are going up every day. The better prepared you are to access the resources, the more likely you'll get your project done on time and under budget.
Thank you so much. And thank you for Senator Street's office for sponsoring this event. Just give a thank you and a shout out to the PIDC communication and marketing team who really helped a lot. Quinn and Jasmine, who isn't here today, but was on all the other sessions, and to Marlo Hamilton for doing all things business development and helping so many businesses across the city. Please, sign up for the PIDC emails, newsletters. You're going to hear a lot about RACP during the RACP cycles through that, and always check in the RACP website from time to time. It is daunting. There has been a lot of information in these 4 sessions, but projects get through it. Projects get reimbursed. Every project that goes through it gets reimbursed. They get their money. And it's really a great program and great for, all of these organizations to be able to receive this money and do great projects in Philly. So thank you for all attending, and please do not hesitate to reach out to me or any of the speakers for questions. And we look forward to working with everybody. So thank you very much.